Working on a 2001 Chevy Impala 4T65E. We're going to replace the pressure control solenoid, which is this guy right here. This is the older design, 98 to 2002. We're replacing two shift solenoids, 1 and 2, filter, complete fluid exchange, fans and loop guard. The reason why we're doing this is we have a extended transmission shift, 1 to 2 shifts delayed. And I found replacing the solenoid actually takes care of the issue most of the time. If it doesn't, then transmission comes apart and we'll rebuild it. Also, I've got a case of transmission fluid, PCS solenoid. You can see the part number on that. Like I said, it's 98 to 2002. 2003 and up is a little bit different. And our shift solenoids times 2 of those. We're going to replace those just because we're in there. You can also replace the TCC solenoid and the pressure plate as well in there. I'm not going to bother with those. We are reusing the transmission pan gasket and side cover gasket as well. I would recommend having a side cover gasket in hand just in case it's torn. I've done these in the past. I've had torn ones. I do glue them back together with RTV Ultra Black and it's held out, no problems with me. So, but I also run the risk of having to take it apart again and redo it over a $50 part. Alright, let's get going. Some specialty tools, larger sockets, 34 and a 36. If it's a factory axle nut, it's going to be the 36. If it's been replaced at one time, it'll be a 34. I also have a slide hammer attachment to pull the axle out. This is not required, but it makes it so much easier to do. So I've done so many of these, I spend an extra $60 on this tool. Drill with a wire brush, I'll show you that on the front suspension components taken apart. Makes it much easier to put it all back together if you wire brush all the parts before taking it apart. Up top, we are going to disconnect the negative battery cable, undo these two guys here with dog bones on both sides. Air hose comes off. I actually remove the master cylinder, leave the lines connected to it, and just position it out of the way. That way when the engine tilts, I don't get hung up on that, which I have in the past. I'll show you that. Got my battery disconnected. Got my nuts off of the dog bones here. I'll show you that here in a second, how to get those out. Airbox is out, and on this car it's got a throttle cable on it, so I took that off just to make it easier for the airbox to come out. See if I can do this one. Probably not. Pulling out these dog bones bolts, pull the engine forward. They slip right out. Same way when you put it back together. Pull it forward and slide them in there. Master cylinder, two 15mm bolts. I've got a swivel on a long extension. And this guy just comes out of the way. Disconnect a little floaty sensor to it. Down in here there's a bracket with 2 bolts on it, 13mm. I'm going to take those out so there's some more slack on the transmission when I drop it down. Also, there's a harness to the transmission. These can be a real bear to get apart. What you do is you push in the sides and then pull it out. I'm trying to do this one-handed, so let me disconnect it now. Refilm. Here's a connector. What you do is you push in the sides and then it releases. So push it in, push the sides in, pull out. And you can wiggle back and forth, try to get it out. Underneath, I've got this thing on the frame rails, jack stands on both sides. That way I can drop the cradle out of place. Cradle bolts, passenger side rear. I undo this one first. It's either a 19 or 21. 21 if it's been replaced at one time. Just loosen this one up a little bit, maybe like a couple turns out. I do this one first. And I slide forward to this front one here, 19 as well. I apologize, those are either 18 or 21, not 19. So 18 or 21, 18 from the factory. Okay, the camera cut out. What I did is I removed the nut on here. I tapped on here and then checked it doing it this way until it came apart. This came off. I removed my caliper nut. It's on here nice and tight. I took a screwdriver, put it in between the rotor and the caliper, held it in place, pulled it off with my breaker bar, and then this one came out on its own. As you can see, it's loose on its own. If it doesn't, you can use like a drift punch it out, or you can use a bolt-on press type of tool that AutoZone loans or other repair places loan out. It bolts on here and then you press it out. What you don't want to do is tap on here. You'll beat up all the threads on here and you'll have to put a new axle in your car. Caliper bolts came off. Caliper's out of the way. You can tie it up if you'd like. You have to remove the lower ball joint nut. There's a cotter pin on here. You remove it with the side cutters, pull it out with that. And then this is an 18mm. Same thing with this. Before you put it back together, clean it up with a wire brush on your drill. That way your ball joint's not going to spin as you put on the nut and drive you crazy. Got this wire out of the way loose. I just do this to prevent damaging it. This splash shield comes off. I dig these out with a little screwdriver and use a trim tool on them. There's 3, 1, 2, and there's one way up in here. Lower transmission mount, 15mm. I already broke this loose. There's 2 of them. This next part is the hardest part of the whole job. We're gonna disconnect the rack from the steering shaft underneath the car. Lock the steering wheel in a straight ahead position so it can't turn. Okay, there's a couple of ways of doing this next procedure. You have to undo the rack and pinion either from a cradle or from a steering shaft. I always undo it from the steering shaft, which is kind of the hard way, since getting that joint back on there can be a real bitch sometimes. I'll fight with it for 20 minutes, half hour at a time. If you'd like, there's 2 bolts that hold the rack on to the cradle. You can undo both of those. And you'll have to support the rack to the car somehow, maybe with like a ratchet strap holding the rack up. If you do not use that ratchet strap to hold the rack up, the rack can drop and it'll pull this joint up in the column apart, and you'll have to take it all apart, and that'll be a huge pain in the ass. So 11mm here. I'm going to undo this pinch bolt with a long extension and undo it with a screwdriver. There's a boot that goes over that. Just pop it up with a screwdriver out of the way.